we name so many things after the devil? A cursory search of the United States Board on Geographic Names indicates that more than 1,000 locations in the United States contain the name devil or devils. Devil's Hole, Devil's Elbow, Devil's Slide, Devil's Fork, Devil's Crossroads, Killed Devil Hills, Devil's Island, Devil's Lake, Devil's Post Pile, even Devil's Potato Patch, which is a real place in Pennsylvania that I am deeply concerned about. But probably the most famous devil of them all, though, is Devil's Tower in far northeastern Wyoming, right on the edge of the Black Hills, America's very first national monument. Now, I've been to Devil's Tower, and I found nothing satanic at all about it. In fact, it's such a striking and awe-inspiring sight, one might wonder why this place isn't named after an angel or heaven or something far more bright and cheery. One might wonder lots of things about how the name Devil's Tower came to be. I certainly did. And so this is the journey we will be taking in this video. Now, the first thing you need to know about Devil's Tower is that it was originally never even called Devil's Tower. That came later, and we will get to that. What came first, though, was the name Bear Lodge. Bear Lodge is what the tower was and currently is called by the region's indigenous peoples. The Crow, Kiowa, Shoshone, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Lakota peoples have all moved through, occupied, or been active in this region of Wyoming at one point or another throughout history. Generally, they all had slightly different names for the tower, but the most commonly used and widespread translation was Bear Lodge. Again, there's multiple stories for how this particular name came about, but most of them revolve around a giant bear whose claw marks created the tower's distinctive columnal features. And even when white settlers and explorers did begin moving into the area of the tower, the name Bear Lodge was still the predominantly used nomenclature. In 1857, after the conclusion of the first U.S. mapping expedition for lands west of the Mississippi River, a map drawn by Lieutenant G.K. Warren included the name Bear Lodge for the tower, along with place names still in use today, such as the Belfourche River and the Missouri Buttes. So if those place names are still in place today, why isn't Bear Lodge? How did it ultimately end up with the name Devil's Tower instead? Well, for that, we can thank a man named Lieutenant Colonel Richard Dodge. Dodge was in charge of the military escort for a scientific expedition to this area in 1875, and he wrote in his journal at one point on this expedition that the local tribes referred to the unique geological feature as Bad God's Tower, which was later just adapted to Devil's Tower. There were no indications, though, that any of the local tribes actually referred to the tower with this name. As we have seen, the most common and widely used translation was Bear Lodge. So how did this mistake happen? Well, the more forgiving have speculated that this was simply a mistranslation between the words for bear and bad god, and that this was all just a simple mistake that ultimately, unfortunately, became permanent. But the more cynical have observed that Dodge was indeed very deeply racist and once referred to Native Americans as having, quote, the ordinary good and bad qualities of the mere animal, modified to some extent by reason, end quote. They charged that Dodge's name for the tower was no accident at all, that he intentionally ascribed a negative name to it as a sort of middle finger to the tribes. Whatever the reason, though, still, the name Devil's Tower did not immediately stick. Official maps, members of Dodge's own expedition, geologists, the government, and sometimes even Dodge himself still continued to use the term Bear Lodge to refer to the tower. It was not until large quantities of settlers began to enter this region that the name Bear Lodge slowly just started to fade and Devil's Tower became more ascendant. Again, though, we probably do have Dodge to thank for this. After the return from his expedition, he wrote a book about it in which he used the Devil's Tower moniker. Somewhere along the way, as people continued to move into this region, perhaps having read Dodge's book, they just started using the Devil's Tower name. And the tribes, continuing to be pushed out of their homelands around the tower, just weren't there to continue keeping the Bear Lodge name in common use. Then, in 1906, with the formal designation of America's first national monument, the name Devil's Tower came to be official, with one small but somewhat quirky little change. See, prior to the designation of the monument, Devil's Tower had always been referred to in its possessive form with an apostrophe S on the end. However, the US Board on Geographic Names, the official arbiter of these sorts of nomenclatural matters, has a rule that generally disallows possessive place names, which is why Devil's Tower today is spelled in the plural form with no apostrophe S. In fact, as far as I can tell, every place name in the US that includes devils is written in its plural, not possessive form. But enough with the word nerd stuff. There's a bigger takeaway here about how we name places in the US and the cultural significances we ascribe or remove from certain locations. The term Bear Lodge never went away because the tribes associated with it never went away. Indigenous tribes still to this day use the term Bear Lodge instead of Devil's Tower. And in 2014, a petition was started to officially change the name of Devil's Tower back to Bear Lodge. As recently as 2024, the US Board on Geographical Names, again the official body in charge of these things, made an official recommendation to the Interior Secretary and the President to change the name. And the president can make this change unilaterally. They have that authority. We've already seen it with Denali and the Gulf of Mexico. But the Board on Geographic Names has another rule. That rule is to not rule on any place name changes that have active legislation concerning them. Which is why in every Congress since 2014, the Wyoming delegation has submitted legislation requiring that the name not be changed. This legislation has never been advanced, it has never been voted on, and it has never been enacted. It has simply been introduced so that the Board on Geographic Names cannot take action. Their reasoning for this legislation is seemingly economic. Many businesses in this area use Devil's Tower in their name, and tourism is a big part of the economy of the area, so they don't want to create any unnecessary hardship for these folks. So for now, the name Devil's Tower remains, officially anyway. But remember, Bear Lodge is not forgotten. The tribes still use it. That name has already persisted for countless generations precisely because of the power that language has to keep that story alive. I like this framing because in many ways it is the story of the national parks themselves. This idea passed down to subsequent generations through the power of storytelling. Bear Lodge may not be the official name of the tower at this moment in history, but the idea it represents lives on in the stories that are told about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic though, so do be sure to let me know what you think of this whole naming controversy or just how we name places in general in the United States. It's a fascinating topic that I'd love to hear from you about. And if you have any information about the Devil's Potato Patch, please let me know. I am deeply worried about what might have happened there. As always, follow me on Instagram, and direct support is always appreciated over on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.